I know Doherty Institute does research. Can you explain to me what research means?
Discovery research is often it's curiosity driven. What research does is try to separate the subjectiveness from the objective. So what can we measure and how can we find patterns in that? And from those patterns, what can we learn from that? Can we predict how things work? And uncovering the inner rulings of the world in which we're living is what research is about.
So how does that relate to what Doherty does?
So we apply this largely to living things, so organisms, but not just us as humans or mammals, but also to understand how the bacteria work, how viruses work, and also how parasites work.
So Sammy, can you perhaps share an example of where something that started out in that discovery or fundamental research actually then translated through to something that people on the street might actually understand?
So focusing, for example, on Peter Doherty's discovery in the 1970s, he was trying to understand how one cell can discriminate another cell. And really just trying to look, is this cell responding or is this cell not responding? And that discovery was then viewed by physicists and seen in the context of immune responses of whole organs. And we now know that in organ transplantation, this problem occurs, and treating patients, therefore, with immune inhibitors makes the organ stay. So the recipient can maintain the organ because of Peter's discovery, and that's why he got the Nobel Prize for that.
From what you were saying before as well, it's a bit of a loop. So this end is talking through to that end and they feed back to each other, and so there's sort of like continuous learning across all the various areas. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And discovery research doesn't exist in isolation, nor does it want to. But we get informed by what happens in the clinical world. If you now cut the discovery part from the pipeline, yes, you will have a few more years of things moving through the pipeline, but the pipeline will run dry, which is a major issue in terms of the research funding. So if you don't fund the discovery part, eventually you also lose the translational part.
Can you explain what translational research is?
What translation for me means, it means taking something that is a discovery at the lab bench and then figuring out how you can actually take that through the steps of clinical development, what's going to work as you move an idea into a product, the manufacturers who actually produce quality product that's safe, the regulators who are going to approve the safety, and then finally the clinicians who are going to be able to take that product and administer it into a susceptible population that will benefit from that product. When you find that there's an urgent clinical need and you see people who actually need solutions to medical problems, it really is much more motivating to connect with the community to understand what they really need, to communicate with the clinicians and to the manufacturers that will have a beneficial result in terms of human health. There's a lot of complexity when you develop an idea into a product. What the pinch points are for safety and for approval through the regulatory process, and then understanding how a product is placed into a clinical trial setting.
You mentioned safety. Do you think that there are other ethical concerns that we have to be aware of in translational research?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that is quite clear is, some of the indications that we work with in infectious disease are highly stigmatized, and some of the ethics around confidentiality. So people don't want to have a product that is necessarily identifying them as having a particular medical infection or problem. And then, beyond safety also, the issues about access. There's no point actually developing something that is, technical marvel and it works really well, but it's just so expensive,
right,
and so difficult to manufacture that, nobody is ever going to be able to afford it. Having that overlay of really wanting to achieve a practical outcome, something that is going to be usable, implementable, and cost-effective is really important.
Yeah. What do you think will enable translational research into the future?
Getting everybody together into the same room, that includes people that don't normally talk to each other, community and manufacturers, for example. Discovery scientists getting together with people who are good at understanding whether your discovery has any capability of becoming a product. As a discovery scientist, you think it's just easy, just breeze in, I've got the solution. But you know, there's a lot of complexity when you develop an idea into a product.
Could you tell us a bit more about what actually is clinical research?
Sure. So clinical research has an important aim, which is to improve health outcomes in people. And so what that means is that we take things like medications or vaccines or new diagnostic tests. It may be a new medication or new vaccine or an existing product, and we study it in humans to get results that we can then use to apply to improve health outcomes.
And are there different forms of clinical research?
So there are different types of studies and designs and trials that we can use for clinical research. Some examples that you might have heard of include things like randomised control trials or observational studies or case control studies.
And are there different stages of clinical trials?
Yes. So phase 1 is usually the first type of clinical trial, and also it's called first in humans, for example. And that's where you have a small number of people. And often the main aim of that stage of clinical research is to test, for example, the dose of a medication or the dose of a new vaccine. And it's all about safety and dose. And then the next stage, or phase 2 trials, again, might look at how the product works. It may look at using a particular dose in a larger number of people, and it is also still very much focused on safety. And then the phase 3 trials are often the much larger trials with often thousands of people in them, and they still often collect safety data, but the real focus of the phase 3 studies is about whether it works. So if it's a medication or a vaccine, it's tested in large numbers of people, and the main question is often, how well does it work?
And what is the role of community in informing this clinical research?
The priority for any clinical research is that whatever we're studying has to be important to the community. We couldn't do clinical research without the community and the volunteers of participants in those clinical trials.
And what does clinical research inform?
The main questions that we tend to ask with clinical research of an existing or a new medication, vaccine or diagnostic is, does it work? Is it safe? Who are the right people that we should give it to? What's the dose we should use? And then we apply that information to those products or tests in the real world.
What happens at policy and practice level to bring research to the community?
The reason we do research is because we want to improve people's health, reduce illness, reduce death, in our case from infectious diseases. So it's really vital that we move beyond just the end of the research project and into actually getting whatever that is into the community.
What's one of the projects that you've been working on that would demonstrate the effectiveness of vaccines into the community, your research work?
So I think, as with you, we did a lot of work during COVID about taking the product, which was vaccines. We knew that they were effective, we knew that they were safe, we sort of knew their whole profile, but we then had to move that from something theoretical into getting Australians to take the vaccine. And so there was a lot of work done in that phase from the end of the research project into getting vaccines available for people and actually people being willing to take them and then being protected from COVID.
Did you find it easy to engage with the community so that they would better understand in a very simpler form how vaccines work?
We have our skills and our knowledge base, but actually communicating in a way that makes sense to people, that gives people the information that they need and that they want to make decisions, is a science and an art in itself. And that's where we really do need to partner with communities to build a bridge between the researchers and the scientists and the policymakers and actually the population who we're trying to help.
How do you build trust and confidence in the community for a vaccine? When something's new, people are very suspicious.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I think from our point of view, we can provide some information about, why we're using the vaccine, who it's recommended for, what, how well it works, how safe it is. Safety is really important, and so it's really important that people understand that there are ongoing safety monitoring.
I'm always fascinated to know what's behind the scenes, and this is what I'm going to ask you. What made you go down this pathway?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of my work is to do with vaccines and preventing disease, and so being able to prevent disease is obviously the best type of medicine is prevention, and so it's just really exciting to be able to be a part of that.